All right. Good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon, I guess. This is John Barrows of Make It Happen Mondays, and I'm super excited to be here with a guest, David. David, actually, where did we meet first? I forget, was it Influitive or was it Salesforce?
It was probably I knew you at Salesforce, but met at Influitive.
Yes. Hold on a second. Let me mute this. David, actually. All right. Sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, knew you from Salesforce, but met at Influitive.
Okay, perfect. So anyways, I wanted to introduce everybody to David. He's actually in my space doing sales training and consulting as well. So competition is always relative, I say. But David hit my radar because he put together a post on objection handling. And I train objection handling, but I train it more about the techniques and tactics. And the post that he wrote was super interesting because it was really about kind of the back end side of negotiations and really understanding where the objection, understanding where that objection's coming from. So that's what I wanted to hit on today. But before we do that, David, I want to give everybody of the audience here a quick little background of where you're coming from and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, I mean, look, the quick story is I started my career as a research scientist and got into sales like most people do by accident. Yep. At the turn of the dot-com boom. So I'm a big advocate of grassroots sales education. More people should be getting into sales on purpose, in my opinion. Totally. But yeah, started my career as a research scientist over 20 years ago, ended up in sales at the turn of the dot-com boom and fell in love with this great profession, but tried to approach it as much as I could from that kind of scientific perspective, but also harmonizing like the human element to it as well, which was just really fascinating to me. I'm just a very curious person. Done 4 startups. The first 3 were acquired. The last one's still kicking. The third one was acquired by a company called Salesforce, and I ended up working there for 5 amazing years and just got to experience what it's like to build sales machines, from small all the way up to large scale. So I've decided now to live my passion for modern day sales education. I've been writing for a long time, and it's one of those things. If you can turn the thing that you love to do most into your full-time job, you're cooking. So that's what I do now. I train people on the art of modern selling.
I love it. And actually, it's funny you bring that up as far as intersection, right? Of what you love and what you're good at. Have you ever heard of the phrase ikigai? It's a Japanese. Look this up, and for the people in the audience here, look at it's Ikigai, and it's a super fascinating Japanese philosophy around how to search for meaning in life. And it takes like what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and does this intersection of really where that sweet spot is. And so, people talk about the work-life balance, which I think is kind of bullshit. This is actually more talking about the purpose and finding that purpose and then leveraging it. So there's an article I'll post. It was on Big Think on this. Actually, I was reading over the vacation that I thought was super cool. So anyways, David, let's talk. First of all, objection handling. How come, as a data scientist, if you will, how come objection handling is something that you kind of geared yourself towards saying, here's a way to think about it based on what else is out there, or kind of how did you come to this point where you say, here's what my thoughts are on objection handling? And I'll put it in context here. A lot of people have good ideas. I've always thought, I have some good ideas, but are they worth the shit? Are they worth people paying for, right? Specifically as it comes to training like you and I do. But where did objection handling come from, and what's the drive around it, and how do you help your customers deal with them? And then we'll get into the article itself.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for most of us, when we deal with sales training, if sales was so easy, I always say if sales was so easy, we would just pay high school students minimum wage to do it instead of, right, very smart people, a lot of money and highly leveraged comp plans to do it. And part of what we're trying to do in the training world is reduce the friction, right? We as sellers experience friction. We're trying to help our buyers through a process. And really, a lot of the sales process has to do with objections and friction. And so I really love, actually, I always say to the people who I teach, objection handling is maybe arguably my most favorite thing to teach.
Okay.
Because there's so much nuance to it. And I actually see objection handling, discovery, and negotiation are kind of 3 legs of a stool, because at any one point, you can move in between them. And in fact, in discovery and negotiation, there's always objections. So objections and dealing with them are a way of helping our buyers, reducing friction in the sales cycle. And, as we always say, sales is life. We see lots of objections in our everyday lives. And so kind of the reason why I kind of got into this was because I'm just so curious. And I was always so curious when objections were raised in a sales cycle, raised in life, like what was really the meaning? How do you get past them? How do you resolve them? And so, I think we're all still students of this. I'm still trying to peel back the onion, but it was one of the most fascinating and pervasive elements of the sales cycles. That's why I just decided to really get into it.
I love it. And how much is what you're doing based on the science and the analytics versus your experience? Kind of the science versus the art that you talk about. Because I always say the same thing. Like, I think sales should be looked at as more of a science than an art, because the science lays the foundation for the art form to be much more effective. And same thing with objection handling. I tell when I train on objection handling, my biggest recommendation to reps is be proactive versus reactive. Like, the objections are coming. Like, if you really thought about it, you could write down the top 5 objections that you get on a daily basis. And so don't make it up on the fly. When you get them, like, you should have a response for them. But how did you compile your training, if you will, around objection handling, and how much of it was data versus kind of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that a fair amount was experience, and then I use kind of the data to help facilitate the resolution of the, and I'd say data, I was a classical kind of, physical chemical scientist, but then got into a little bit more of this behavioral science, which is still, legit science. Yeah. And when I think about, why kind of the way I think about objection handling, I think of it on a continuum of emotion, because oftentimes we think of objections as logical things like, oh, it's too expensive. Oh, okay, well, let me see how I can make that more affordable for you. And in some cases, that can be the case. One of the exercises I actually go through when I teach objection handling is I say, like, take this example of it's too expensive. Customer says it's too expensive. And then what I want you to do is I want you to think of all the reasons why the customer is saying it's too expensive. And we come up with pages and pages. And they all range from like, hey, I don't have a budget, for what you're proposing, all the way to, I really don't want to buy your solution because I have a buddy that works at another company whose solution I'm really going to buy. And no matter what you say, it's just going to be too expensive.
Yep.
Right. So there's that. And then there's the whole continuum in between. So trying to figure out, like, all right, where is the customer actually coming from is a little bit more art. I mean, certainly there's questions we can ask.
Sure.
And then when it comes to resolving the objection, part of it is art and kind of the psychology, and I can give you some examples rooted in science. In many cases to help us resolve. So I like to kind of harmonize those two things, but that continuum of emotion is really, really important.
I love it. Cause you almost every sales training methodology, right, has some form of understanding the true objection where, Sandler, it's the pain funnel. And when I say objection, or the issue, if you will, because that's ultimately what we're trying to get at. The objection's coming from somewhere. To your point, it could be we literally have zero money versus I just don't want this, So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of understanding both pieces of it, but let's actually, I'm sorry, let me skip to the back end of it. When you absolve because I got a very specific question here for the audience, when you address whatever objection's coming up here, how do you know you've really addressed it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So here's this funny example. The thing I talk a lot about in objection handling is satisfaction, which is exactly what you said. I can address something, but how do I know I've addressed it to someone's satisfaction? I always play the clip from Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a movie that no one has seen, by the way.
Yeah, no kidding. They just know the 8 minutes. Just
those 8 minutes. But there was a scene. I'm not gonna swear on your show here, but there was a scene where.
Please do my audience as well. We're well versed in it.
Oh, okay, all right. So where Ed Harris says, hey, what's your name, right? And Alec Baldwin.
That's my name.
Fuck you. That's my name.
Yep.
Right? And so I always show that as that 15 seconds as an example of that's an objection handle, sure. Right? The objection was, who are you to come down here and tell me what to do? And basically, the objection handle was shut up, and I'm better than you are.
Yep.
Now it was handled. The objection went away, but it was not satisfied. Right. It's not deeply satisfied. So oftentimes, I don't know. I find with objection handling, this is kind of where the art and the science, you can tell if someone is satisfied. So if you were to ask me a question and say, oh, it's too expensive, and I kind of give you an objection handle, and I say, is that okay? How does that sound?
Yep.
And someone says like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I know it's not satisfying, and that's kind of where the emotional intelligence comes in, where you have to be able to pick that up and say, I'm hearing that you're satisfied, but I kind of get the sense that you're not.
Right.
And I want to make sure, let's just beat it through. And I think unless you understand the root cause of the objection, you'll never really be able to satisfy it. So if someone just says, oh, it's expensive, and I give something and they say, oh, it's okay, it's really getting down to the root cause. So I think it's less about, hey, did I satisfy that objection and getting the yes or no? And more about the upfront work. Let me just understand. I want to make sure I understand this objection. Is the issue that the price is A, B, and C? Yes. And I'd say that's just as important as the resolution in terms of generating that satisfaction after the fact.
I love it. Yeah. And I think, the closing question is, to me, is, hey, does that answer your questions, obviously, but more importantly, is that going to prevent us from doing business together? Regardless of whether I handled it the right way, or you're 100% satisfied with it, is that what's going to get us? Is that specifically going to get in the way of us doing business together?
Yeah.
The way by phrasing it that way, you're going to get a yes or a no. It's like, yeah, if we can't address that, like, I'm not satisfied with that answer. If we can't address it, there's no way we're going to be moving forward here. Well, now, I stop the presses here, effectively focus all in on whatever that is and try to address it.
Yeah, I think it's the same. So this is why I feel like objection handling, negotiation are all part of the same thing.
Totally.
Sometimes people, I'd say often, and the science says, people underestimate the power that they have. Yep. In an objection handling situation or negotiation. So someone says, oh, it's too expensive, or, I can't pay annually, which is a frequent objection we would get at Salesforce, very annual business. Sure. I can't pay annually, and so before I start trying to resolve that objection, is this a deal breaker? Just asking. Absolutely.
Yeah. And also I kind of skipped over, I got a little bit of a brain fart there, but, with the different sales methodologies, right? Like Sandler, pain funnel, 3 layers of why, spin selling, all that stuff. It's really trying to get to that. And there's a technique, if you will, called the clarification technique, which is when somebody gives you the objection, instead of answering it, which is my problem historically, because we're getting into the psychology around this, right? Have you studied anything on neurolinguistic programming by any chance?
A little bit, yeah.
Right. So, I'm a visual communicator. When you ask me a question, my gut reaction is to immediately answer that question, because either I think I've heard it before, or just that's my nature, right? Is to answer a question. But I've actually had to purposely put clarification things into my process, because when you ask me a question, a lot of times it's not that's not really what you're asking. You're asking it down here and it's coming from a different place. So I've actually introduced clarification, or some people call them layering questions. Can you explain to me? Could you give me an example of, to really, first of all, slow myself down, but second of all, to really get to the root, really where's this coming from? Right? Because I'd say at least 80% of the time when I ask a clarifying question on an objection, I get a much better understanding of what that objection is, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and oftentimes I find customers will ask you a question, and we as sellers don't want to ask the clarification question because we feel we should know the answer. We get these questions all the time. And so I've found oftentimes when you ask that clarifying question, the customer will come back and say, you know what, I probably didn't explain that in the best possible way. And then in your head, you're thinking, oh, thank goodness, because I don't feel like such an idiot because I didn't get that question. But you're right. Like, moving slow is important. And in fact, I took some leadership training years ago that talked about how men are especially bad at this. When my wife brings me a problem, I feel like she wants me to solve it, right? Like,
that's what I'm here for, is solve the problem.
That's right. Which is not the case. I feel like we're a little bit at disadvantage there. But yes, absolutely. Asking now, look, you can't ask ad nauseum, but
right.
But yes, clarifying. Absolutely.
It's kind of like I took a Sandler class, and the guy did the reverse questioning on me, right, which is effectively layering and whatever. And so he asked me a question, or no, I asked him a question. He reversed it on me, which I'm like, okay, we're just trying to get clarification. I asked the question again after I answered it. He reversed it on me again. I was like, okay, and I asked it a third time, and he went back into it, and I go, look, if you don't answer my goddamn question right now, like, this conversation's over. I'm getting annoyed here. So there's a certain layer of qualification, but I think you have, to a certain point, you have to kind of stop and realize that they probably gave you everything that they have at that point, or if they didn't, they're hiding it from you, and the likelihood of you getting it out is not going to be high.
Yes, it's true. We always talk about how important emotional intelligence is. We talk about satisfaction, getting down to the meat of it, whether it's objection handling, discovery, negotiation. There's things that, people have in their head that they don't want to share. and getting that out can sometimes be difficult. So I think approaching the situation with as much empathy as you can. Even in your clarification questions, you can say, hey, look, so I just want to clarify. Typically, when I work with customers like you, I hear an objection around. When I hear that objection, to me, it means this.
Right.
But I don't want to assume that's the case with you. Can you explain? So you kind of like that reward reverse, giving a little bit, kind of to pull it out of them, show that you're very keen to understand the deeper meaning.
I love it. So let's dive into the post here, because I think, and I'll link this to the Facebook Live for everybody else who's watching, and then the podcast, I'll make sure it gets in there as well. But you come at it from a little bit of a different perspective, which is, where is the customer coming from with that objection? And you have this whole understand, decide, delay, satisfy, derail, right? And those are kind of the 5 different types of objections, or why people are giving you an objection. And, just to skip over understand, that one seems pretty easy when somebody's genuinely trying to understand so they can help you, sell it internally. I did have a question as it relates to that, because, you say, hopefully your champion, or, same thing with a support one, right? Which is, you ask your champion when they're really trying to make a decision on this and you're trying to work with them. Question for you: how do you know, what's your definition of a champion?
Yeah, I mean, it's someone who has a very strong, that doesn't have to be a person in high positional power in the organization, but definitely someone who has a strong affinity towards your solution, to you as a seller, and who is willing to help you and usher you kind of as in a concierge fashion through the buying process on the customer side, willing to give you insights that you probably wouldn't get from a non-champion, someone who is willing to help you facilitate that buying process. Someone who's sitting, think about it, on the same side of the table as you, extension of you as the seller.
Yeah, and that's pretty much mine as well. And by the way, sidebar for everybody listening to this, if you haven't determined, or if you haven't defined what a true champion means within your organization, please sit down with your managers and have that exercise, because I think champion is probably one of the most, probably the 3rd most overused phrase in sales. I got a champion, right? And you really, well, how do you know? Well, it's just because, because the guy likes talking to me and he picks up my phone call. It's like, nah. My slight alteration to yours is, they actually sit at the table when the time comes to make the decision. They don't have to be the decision maker. They don't have to be the authority, the person that has the budget. They have to be able to influence that budget and take that money away. Otherwise, it's a coach. And coaches are cool. Coaches are people that help us navigate and tell us where we need to go. But if they're not sticking their neck out when it matters, then to me, they can't be a champion. So they do have to have a certain level of clout. They don't have to be the CEO or the VP, but they have to have enough clout to be able to be in that room when having that conversation. So let's go into the ones that I'm pretty interested in here. The level 2, level 2 is they're deciding. So I get that. Let's talk about the level 3 delay, because I think this is the one that most of the audience gets, at least my audience gets. And I think our number one competitor obviously is no decision. And the person that says, hey, here's a perfect example. So Morgan, I just brought Morgan on board. We have him for some short-term success going right after SDR managers. Okay. Because that he used to be an SDR manager, so he knows how to speak that language and all that other stuff. And so he's doing a great job. He's getting good conversations, great stuff. But then it goes towards, okay, I have to bring this to my VP of sales to get authorization for it. And now he's stuck in this friend zone, right? Which is, look, it's not me. I'm still waiting on my boss. I'm still, I'm still hearing, oh, it's the end of the quarter. We'll get back to income. So that derail, or kind of just, what's the mentality behind that? And what do you do as a sales rep to overcome it?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction between like a true delay tactic, which is, let's say you call someone and they say, call me back next month. Or, you know what, we'd like to explore this further, but we have a new VP of sales who's starting next month, and this should really be their call. So I think we should just wait until then. Which is different than the kind of the no response. Like, oh, I'm trying to get in touch with, I need to bring someone else into this conversation who's hard to reach. To me, that's not really a delay tactic, because the person is still interested in moving forward, or at least it's not overtly a delay tactic. The person is just, you need to navigate to that person to try to bring them in.
Gotcha.
When I think about the delay tactics, I think about like, yeah, call me back next month. Hey, look, this sounds good, but I think we need to get a few more quotes. The new VP is starting next week, and I think, this should be their decision, or even, we need to go through an RFP.
Yep.
And so the way I kind of think about kind of addressing that objection, which is, it's kind of like the middle of the road. I find that most objections kind of fall not so much we should be so lucky on the decision side and the understanding side, like, oh, is it available in French, like, or Spanish? Like, wouldn't it be great if that was it? And it's not often a customer trying to completely derail us. It's usually in the middle where you're trying to delay or trying to understand how to satisfy the objection. And so there's kind of two techniques I talk about when we talk about delay tactics. Number one is to qualify, and number two is to remind. So number one, we think about qualifying. Okay, so, hey, call me back next month, or, we need to have the new VP start. Well, help me understand. If I were to call you back next month, what would we talk about? I want to make sure I'm respecting your time, so I'm happy to call you back next month if you'd like us to do that. Going through an RFP process. Well, help me understand. What does that process look like? Is that something that you think we should be involved? To kind of pull the kind of the second lever on remind. Oftentimes, when there is a delay tactic in play, there's a cost to the customer of delaying. Mm-hmm. So you might say, like, I've been in situations before many times where they say, well, we want to go through an RFP, and you say, well, hold on a second. So let me understand. You're going to go through the RFP. The RFP process is probably going to take X number of months. You said that this problem before, because we did the discovery, was costing you about $10,000 a month. You're going to get a whole bunch of vendors who are responding to this RFP saying all good things, and we're all going to say the same thing.
Right. And
there might be some questions that you're not going to ask that would actually highlight some of the really great differentiators between the vendors. So, is this something that you want to spend all this time going through? Because I don't know if it's really in your best interest to do it. And so that's what I mean when someone's delaying, qualifying them, reminding them of the cost of the delay, and helping the customer decide whether or not it even makes sense to delay, whether you want me to call you back, should we go through the RFP process? Does it make sense to wait till the VP is back next week, or the new VP? Maybe there's some things we can actually do in the meantime to set the foundation to decide whether or not we can move forward, or we should set that VP up for success in a specific way. So those are the techniques I like to employ around the delay. It's really exploring the delay, qualifying the delay, and reminding the customer of the cost of the delay.
I think so it's funny because, I do the exact same thing slightly differently from a techniques and approach. But one of the biggest things, I think one of the biggest benefits and challenges of objection handling is that usually the client is working with all the information. They know exactly how much budget they have. They know exactly, what other initiatives they're working on, what their real timeline is, and really what happens if they don't do this. And so that's why I think the qualification phase is so important, to dig into two or three of the kind of the go-to questions, like, if you will, of, to your point of how much is this costing you per month if you don't do this, what happens if you don't do so, all that. Hey, what are your priorities and what are your challenges type of approach in the qualification phase, so that then later on, what I do is I call it my summary email, right? Where afterwards, hey, great conversation today. Here's a few things I took out of this. Could you please email me back? Let me know if it's all accurate and if I missed anything. And then getting you to say, yes, John, that's accurate, because now in 2 or 3 days, or 2 or 3 weeks, when you flake on me, I can remind you to say, hey, is this still accurate? Because if it is, we should move forward here. But if it's not, that's okay. Let's just get 10 minutes back on the calendar so we can reset those expectations, right?
Oh yeah, there's one of my favorite articles. I was referencing it last week. It was called "The Most Powerful Question in Sales and 3 Ways to Use It." And the most powerful question, to burst the bubble, is what problem are we trying to solve? Mm-hmm. And you can use it in the discovery phase. Okay, help me understand what problem you're trying to solve. Sure. You can use it in the escalation phase. So when let's say I'm talking with you and you're like the sales director, and now you're going to bring me into conversation with the VP. I can then summarize, here's what I've heard so far from John, your sales director. Here's the problem you're looking to solve, so I can use it there. But then lastly, it's when the customer maybe gets some cold feet or tries to back out. You can always say, hey, look, I understood you were trying to solve this problem, which we quantified to be of such a size. Has that gone away? Right. Is that something? So when they try to delay, you can kind of pull them back. Now, obviously, the customers are always going to do what's in their best interest. I think it's our job as sellers to the extent we can, show them that not delaying is actually in their best interest.
Yeah. And if they do delay, again, documenting that, because inevitably when they delay, they ultimately come back if they're ready to sign. And now it's like this rush job. Well, I need it by this date. And I need it. And I think as long as you articulate that earlier on to say, this is what happens, when you delay, these type of things happen, and then document that and get them to confirm it. Now you get something to at least say, hey, slow your roll here a little bit, pal. I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure you're on board the right way. But I told you our process is this, and you agreed to that next time we had that conversation, or last time we had that conversation, right?
Yeah. And look, I love building on what you just said, thinking about when you go back to the customer and you say, hey, look, here's what I heard. Instead of saying, did I miss anything, which is great, we can say, what am I missing? What have I have missed something, I'm sure. The worst thing you can have is a customer that comes back and says, oh, everything is good. I mean, that does happen, right? But you want them to start poking holes in your argument so that when it comes to the risk of delay or an objection, you've shored that up as much as you can.
Got it. Look, in a couple minutes left here, let's dive into like the nasty ones, because a huge part of the audience that listens to this are the kids making the calls, and somebody just straight up says, I listened to one of Morgan's calls recently where the guy was just like, yeah, take me off your list immediately. And Morgan and I give him credit for this, man. He pushed back and said, hey, I thought you were an SDR manager. And the guy's like, excuse me? He's like, so, I called you with a very specific reason for my call and what I wanted to talk to you about, and you're screaming at me to take me off your list. Do you tell your sales reps to make phone calls? And that was his question. And I thought it was an extremely good question to the right person. And the guy was just, yeah, whatever, take me off your list, click. And so, look, there's some people that you're never going to be able to, you're never going to be able to change their mind no matter what approach you take, right? But are there some things that you can do to address that person who's either trying to straight up derail you, or to your level 4 one, which is satisfy, like, hey, somebody else got it for half as much, like that happens in this, let's talk about pricing, right? That happens in the SaaS world all the time. It's like, hey, I heard you sold it to XYZ company for, $30 a license. Why are you pitching it to me for 50? Right? So, or just straight up, like, we're not interested in this. So what are your kind of thought process around dealing with kind of the aggressive objection that most reps just pretty much cave on and say, okay, sorry, click, or I'll give it to you for $30, that type of thing?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, your argument, I call it the cilantro argument. So I don't know if you like cilantro or not, John. Do you like cilantro?
Yeah, a little hot. Yeah,
I do too. But some people just hate it. And I ask people in my audiences, I'm like, have you ever tried to convince someone who hates cilantro that they should like it? It's not happening.
Yeah.
So remember that not everyone is going to be a good fit, and you don't have to change everyone's mind. When someone's, to your question, when someone's trying to derail you, sometimes starting with a logical objection handling approach can be good, because some people might just have that temperament where they just come at you with guns a-blazing and they actually do want an answer, but you'll very quickly learn if that's going to work or not, like as in your Morgan example. If it's a serious derailing objection, one of the things I advocate for is really mapping out the customer landscape. So is this person who's derailing us, are we single threaded through them? Are they actually a key influencer? Is there someone else in the deal that can help us? Can we phone a friend? Is there an opportunity to short circuit the objection or bring one of our players in? We often talk about account-based marketing, which is more about aligning people in our organization with theirs. So is there a way of short circuiting that objection by bringing the right people in? I think speed is also important. So being able to address the objection, and I actually had a question for you, but being able to address the objection sooner than later. People have a very strong status quo bias, and the longer they hold on to that objection, the more powerful it becomes.
Absolutely.
I actually had a question for you. When you think about, you talked about being proactive in your objection handling, which is oftentimes to write it down, make a playbook, make sure that your team knows it. Yep. But the question of, should I be proactively, if I know my product is expensive, right, should I be and I know 9 times out of 10 cost is going to come up. Yep. Should I just bring that up at the beginning of the sales cycle?
So I think, so that's a technique, right? I call it the preemptive strike, where and it's only when the objection happens so consistently based on the same scenario. You know what I mean? It's not, we all get pricing, but do we all get pricing objection from this person at this stage of the sales process, qualification, whatever it is? And yes, if it's happening more times than not, then my recommendation with objection handling is always split test, try everything, right? And so identify a challenge, an objection, come up with an approach, whatever the technique is, feel, felt, found, reprioritization, justification, clarification, those type of things. And then play around with it for that week. So when that specific objection comes up, use that objection handling technique each time, and then just do a plus minus. It worked, it didn't work. So that would, when I say be proactive, I say, write down your objections and come up with a couple of different ways of handling them. But then there's the proactively addressing the objection before it comes up, which is a technique called the preemptive strike. And I'm a big fan of that one, specifically, again, when you know your business and hey, I'll ask it, hey, is pricing the number one consideration for you here in this thing, right? Because the reason I ask is because, we're not the cheapest on the block, but we never want to be. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so I think once you start getting into that very serious, satisfaction-based derailing, you kind of have to rethink. First thing I always say is ask, is this worth it? I mean, Morgan gave that great objection response, which I think is great. And sometimes that can turn the tables around, but, oftentimes, it's already gone too far. So, question, are you out to lunch? Can you even, do this? And then, when it comes to satisfaction, derailing objections, empathy, like that's the first thing is just, hey, look, you're dealing with an emotionally charged person. For you to come in all emotionally charged is not going to do anyone any favors. You kind of have to match that temperament, right? The way you think about it, like imagine you went into a restaurant and you were standing in line for a long time and you saw a couple come in that was, just got in and just, the maitre d' kind of sat them. And you would go up to the host and you would say, hold on a second. We were here first. Right? And you're all emotionally charged. If the person started screaming back at you and say, well, sir, they were here 3 hours ago and now they just get
you'd lose your mind.
You lose your mind, right? So I think the service industry can teach us a lot about objection handling. It's as much about what you say and how you say it, much about what you say as how you say it and how you you bring that empathy.
Yeah, tone matters, right? All you got to do is ask anybody who's in a relationship how tone matters, right? With one very specific word, which is the word fine, right? Hey, honey, how was your day? Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Honey, how was your day? Fine. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to bring that. Yeah, no,
David, I got to get off here. I got another call scheduled here, but I appreciate your time. Look, for everybody who's looking for more, again, I'll post this on there, but go to cerebralselling.com. The article on David's blog is called The Ultimate Guide for Mastering Objections. And David, tell everybody else how else they can, find out more information about what you're doing and who you're helping out these days.
Yeah, cerebralselling.com has everything. It has all of my content, blog posts, podcasts, information about the training I deliver, speaking engagements, and so on. And then LinkedIn, just like you, man. I'm all over LinkedIn as much as I can, Twitter. So feel free to hit me up, and I'd love to connect.
Perfect. Well, David, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I feel like you and I could have this conversation for another couple hours here. Yeah. But in the interest of keeping the audience entertained and enjoyable, and half hour, I think is the right mix. I'll put this out on podcast for everybody listening there. But anyways, thank you, David, for your time, and everybody else, make it a great day.
Right on. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, man.
Take care.
Cheers.